Why is the U.S. government prohibiting Ukrainian refugees from coming to the United States? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy, limited government, free markets, economic liberty. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again. How are things going?
Things are going pretty good. Of course, Monday was official tax day. That's always a depressing day.
Yeah, well, how about your students? Are you teaching them anything about the taxes and the other aspects of this so-called free society that we live in?
What you mean? I would explain freedom ideas to my students? What would ever give you that idea?
Well, I thought that's what you were doing in life.
I'm a closet statist. A closet statist. Now, obviously, the students have gotten a hint, a sort of indirect hint that I hold the kind of views that we normally talk about in LA.
You know, we don't generally talk about your classes, but you know, Richard, went back in the day. I recall that I don't think there was another Austrian economics professor, I could be mistaken, that generated more students going for their PhDs than you. At least you're in the top three or four professors in that category. So, how about it in the last few years at the Citadel? Have you had any students going on to graduate school?
Actually, here at the Citadel, no. Mostly because the economics program does not stand alone. It's part of the School of Business. And most of the Citadel students are focusing on majors in finance, accounting, marketing, and taking economics as a minor or a supplement. And then, of course, there's a certain percentage that then plan to go into the military when they graduate, either because they're just doing this or they've actually gotten uh, government money to get their undergraduate degree with a commitment to then serve in the military for X number of years as sort of the quid pro quo for that. But I can say, and I can say happily, that many of the students who major in some business area or take the economics courses at the Citadel are very right thinking. And I mean right thinking both in the sense of correct thinking from our point of view, as well as what you consider not left politically. They are suspicious of government intervention and regulation. They're very open to market economics. Not surprisingly, at a place that attracts conservatives, a good number of the students have been in the past supporters of Donald Trump and have taken for granted a number of his economic arguments, his pro-protectionism view, his attempt to poo-poo international trade, and I've sort of corrected their errors and having told them that now they know more economics than a former president of the United States, Donald Trump. So they should feel good about themselves.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not saying very much.
But but no, almost all the students that pass through my classes here, regardless of their backgrounds, either come in or end up very understanding, sympathetic, if not enthusiastic, about a limited government free market approach. One of my obligations as a BB&T professor at the Citadel is to regularly teach a course on market ethics in modern society. In fact, the course which I'm teaching this semester. And in that, the students read Friedrich Bastiat, Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, some Ayn Rand, John Locke, and then a whole potpourri of other social thinkers and economists dealing with the issues of the day, from social responsibility of business or the downsides economically and ethically of redistribution of wealth, regulation of the economy, and so on. And the students respond to all of this in an extremely positive way.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is that at the very least, you're exposing them to concepts and ideas of libertarianism and Austrian economics and genuine free markets, not the kind of free market concept that conservatives think is free market. And that stays with them the rest of their lives. When you and I first met some decades ago in Dallas, you were teaching economics at the University of Dallas, and I was teaching a course in law and economics. And, I've stayed in touch with one of my students, and I'm virtually certain he took classes with you. I won't mention his name, but he he became a real ardent supporter of Austrian economics and libertarianism, a big supporter of FFF. I was around in my late 30s at the time, so he was in his 20s, and he told me that he's now retired. He sold out his business, apparently at a very generous amount of money. And so it stayed with him, and I can't help but believe that it stayed with a lot of other students that you've exposed these ideas to over the years.
Yeah, I can say that I have students who I had back in the 1990s, especially when I first started at Hillsdale, or then after Hillsdale, when I was fee president, or at Northwood University before coming here to the Citadel. Many of those students have stayed in touch, and as you were kindly mentioned, I've particularly from my Hillsdale and Northwood days, I had students who went on to earn graduate degrees in economics themselves. To name just a few, there's a fellow named Peter Leeson at George Mason University. There's Robert Murphy, who's out in Texas Tech. There's Paul Swick at Mount Olive College in North Carolina. I have another one named Peter Calcano, who is a full professor of economics right here, actually, where I am, but not at the Citadel, at the College of Charleston, just down the road. So I've had a number of students who have gone on, and others that be too long of a list. But I feel very good. I mean, one of the greatest rewards as a teacher or professor is that you can influence young minds in such a way, not only to think a different way, a better way, hopefully, but to see them so enthusiastic about the ideas that they want to devote a good part of their lives to spreading those ideas and sharing with others as well.
Yeah. Well, wasn't Ivan Pongrasic another one of your students?
No, Ivan Pongrasic is someone who teaches at Hillsdale College. I hired him before
Oh,
I left
okay.
Hillsdale,
Okay.
and while Ivan has not written very much, I can say that he has been of great value to Hillsdale because he's superb in the classroom.
Okay. Well,
He earned
speaking of
his PhD at George Mason University.
PhDs, you've been accorded an honor or will be accorded an honor. You want to tell us about that?
Letting a cat out of the bag. Yes, I a few weeks ago, totally out of the blue and completely unexpected, got a letter from the president of Francisco Marroquin University in Guatemala City, Guatemala. Let me just preface before the rest of it is that Francisco Marroquin is a private university um, established in the late 50s, early 1960s, particularly inspired by a libertarian, classical, liberal free market businessman down in Guatemala named Manuel Ayau. It is now one of the most highly regarded institutions of higher learning in all of Latin America. And that includes a school of medicine and a school of dentistry. They are devoted to classical liberal free market and especially Austrian economic principles. No student graduates from Francisco Marroquin University, regardless of their major, including the School of Medicine, unless they take two classes, mandatory classes before they go across the stage. And that is the social philosophy of Ludwig von Mises and the social philosophy of Friedrich Hayek. So that just shows you the philosophical and economic and ideological origin of the institution. Well, a few weeks ago, as I said, unexpectedly, out of the blue, received a letter from the president of Francisco Marroquin saying that they were inviting me to come down for their graduation ceremonies this coming May 7, 2022, because they wish to award me an honorary PhD, doctoral degree, for my contributions over the decades to the cause of an understanding of economic freedom and the free society, which I'm very touched by. So I'll be going down there the weekend of May 7th to receive this very kind and generous honorary doctoral degree from Francisco Marroquin University.
Yeah, I might amplify that it's a remarkable institution in terms of learning libertarian principles and Austrian economics. I think their library is named after Hayek or Bastiat or something like that.
Mises.
After Mises, okay. But they have a Bastiat auditorium or a Hayek
Yes, they
auditorium?
do. They have a Bastiat auditorium, a Hayek auditorium. They have a Milton Friedman auditorium. They have a beautiful mural, I would say, on one of the main sides of the building, devoted and inspired by Ayn Rand. It's sort of a version of Atlas holding up the world. The idea of Atlas Shrugged. They have like a little Ayn Rand garden. It's a great, and they have one of the best libraries in Latin America, including on classical liberal and free market ideas. For instance, in their library of quote old books or classic books, they have a first edition of the Spanish translation of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations from the 1790s.
Wow.
So they have now obviously half of the classes are taught in English. So the students, for educational purposes, are fairly bilingual. But obviously, it's an institution of higher learning in the Spanish-speaking world. So their library has a huge amount of books in Spanish as well as other languages. But given that, they have many classics of Spanish literature in history, in economics, in political science, in the culture of the Latin American world. It's really an impressive library.
Yeah, and it's a renowned institution because whenever I run into an immigrant from Guatemala and I engage him in conversation or her in conversation, I mention that I've been to Guatemala, and they're shocked because not very many Americans travel to Guatemala, and they inevitably ask me, well, what for? And I said, well, I lectured at the Francisco Marroquin University there for about a week, and I know you had the same experience of lecturing there. And they're impressed. They always know about Francisco Marroquin University. It's renowned throughout the country. It's a very, very prestigious institution, and so it always leads to further conversation that I have with them. And that was an exciting week for me. I mean, they treated me like a very important person, and they showed me around. They took me to Antigua, which is this beautiful little town outside Guatemala City. So it was a wonderful week, and I tip my hat to you, Richard. That's really a high honor to be awarded that doctorate.
Yeah, my wife Anna and I, my wife has a PhD in history and political science from Moscow State University. We both have lectured down at the university there several times. She's given a week of lectures in history. I've given a week of lectures on various aspects of Austrian economics, and I can just repeat what you just said. They have always treated us with great hospitality, graciousness. Basically, they treat you like royalty because they so value and appreciate you coming down and sharing your abilities to convey these freedom ideas to their students. So I'm looking forward to going down there again.
All right, well, let's get on to business now, real business. And let's talk about what's been going on in Texas for the rest of the show here. You've got the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, engaged in, well, I guess the best term would be border follies. This guy is doing all kinds of strange stuff, but it's stuff that's consistent with his mindset, which is favoring this socialist immigration control system that has besieged America really throughout my life. I mean, I grew up on the border. I've seen this immigration crisis firsthand. It's never gone away. It's a perpetual crisis. The mainstream press always argues, oh, why don't they enact comprehensive immigration control? I love that term, comprehensive immigration control, reform. And in other words, they're suggesting that there's a solution to this crisis that involves some kind of status reform. It's ridiculous. No matter what they do, no matter what reform they adopt, there's going to be a perpetual immigration crisis. And that's because that comes with immigration controls. America's system of immigration controls and trade restrictions as well is a socialist system. It's a system based on central planning, which is a core feature of socialism. With socialism always comes crises and chaos. And so how can it surprise anybody that you've got this system based on chaos and crisis on a perpetual basis? Not to mention the fact, Richard, that there's a police state down there. A police state comes with immigration controls. I mentioned that I grew up on the border on a farm on the Rio Grande, and the Border Patrol could come onto our farm whenever they wanted to search for illegal immigrants. And they busted some of our workers. We hired illegal immigrants on our farm. And it was always a consensual transaction. But boy, they'd just come on in without a warrant. If we put a lock on our gate, they'd shoot off the lock. And then they'd drive all the way down to the river. We would immigrate out of the Rio Grande. We would irrigate out of the Rio Grande. Well, I recently returned to Laredo, for a personal matter, and I went over to visit my old farm, which is now fully developed. There's houses and all this, and down the river, there's a park there that's named after a Catholic priest who was a good friend of mine. And they couldn't build houses there because of the floodplain from the Rio Grande. But lo and behold, down there on the river, on this park, are two Border Patrol vans with Border Patrol agents staring at the river, waiting for illegal immigrants to cross. And everywhere you go in Laredo, when I was growing up, there'd be immigration controls combined with DEA agents, and of course, Laredo cops and sheriff's department. It's a veritable police state down there. Well, what Abbott does is Abbott wants, fiercer immigration controls. He says that Joe Biden is an advocate of open borders, which is so ludicrous. It's amazing that an intelligent man doesn't have any conception of what open borders means. And it's only we libertarians that favor open borders. Joe Biden may differ on how immigration controls should be enforced. Like, for example, he favors a Berlin fence, while the Republicans favor a Berlin Wall. Or they have disagreements on how people seeking political asylum should be treated, or how extensive the searches should be on the border. But make no mistake about it, both Democrats and Republicans favor this socialist system. There are differences in degree of enforcement and manner of enforcement. It is only we libertarians who favor the concept of open borders. Now, what does open borders mean? Well, look at the states. Domestically, people can cross from one state to another state, from Maryland into Virginia and vice versa, with no controls, no interference, no guards, no inspections. That's what open borders means. That's what we're fighting for on an international basis too. So to make a big showcase of this, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, first of all, starts transporting illegal immigrants to Washington in buses. And then he leaves them off in Washington to make this big statement of, oh, you handle them. Like treating them like cattle or something, just shipping up north and just letting them go. It's just so ridiculous. How can any person treat a human being like this, Richard? It boggles my mind. But then he sends his state troopers down to the border and says, I want you to start inspecting the cars, the vehicle, the commercial trucks that are coming across, because he was convinced that they were filled with illegal immigrants and drugs. So, because, of course, Republicans are big advocates of the war on drugs, which is quite possibly the most failed government program in U.S. history. But he felt like, well, the feds really aren't catching all the drugs and the immigrants. Well, he causes a slowdown that causes the food, fresh perishable vegetables and fruits, to rot because of the long delay that he's now causing, these long lines. And so he ends up costing people, it's been estimated, hundreds of millions of dollars in financial losses, not to mention all the taxpayer money that's been lost or wasted. And then he, out of public outrage, he finally says, okay, I'll cease and desist. But this is the mindset of a statist, is what can he do to finally win this war on drugs or this war on illegal immigrants? And no matter what he does, it's going to be a fiasco. It always is a fiasco. that there's really only one solution to this thing, Richard, and that's open borders, libertarianism, free markets, free trade, open immigration, the free movements of people, freedom of association, economic liberty, free markets, limited government. That's the solution to this. And let me underline something. That is the only solution. There are no other solutions. As long as this system remains in place, a socialist central planning system of immigration controls, there will be a crisis. No matter what they do, no matter what reform they adopt, the only real moral answer of people treating people like human beings, loving thy neighbor as thyself, and bringing freedom, peace, prosperity, and harmony to America, that solution lies with the libertarian position of open borders. What do you think?
Well, I'd like to sort of point out that a lot of times the left will say that these immigration restrictions all are racist based. The conservatives, the Republicans, they don't want Latinos in. They don't want Africans in or Asians in because they have a racist, Eurocentric perspective and desire for what America should be demographically. But the fact is, the US government is not allowing Ukrainians into the United States, given the crisis over there, any easier than people coming across the Rio Grande from Latin America. Viewers and listeners, I'm sure it's kind of hard to miss it if you follow any bit of the news. About 5 million Ukrainians have had to flee or have chosen to flee from Ukraine to either Eastern or Central or Western European countries because of the fighting due to the Russian invasion of their country. Virtually all of these countries, both the governments and certainly the citizens, the private citizens of these countries, have opened their arms to these Ukrainian refugees who are escaping from either actual or feared a military bombardment. Because the Russians have been vicious. I mean, you just have to watch the television or streaming news, and they've obliterated cities. It looks like those old pictures, documentary pictures of bombed out World War II cities in Europe. And the Europeans have been very generous, very benevolent, very charitable to 5 million people. Well, according to, it was either the New York Times or the Washington Post just a few days ago, there are approximately 10,000 Ukrainians who have been getting into the United States, but they're being held up. A huge amount of paperwork. Oh, are you eligible? What day did you arrive? Because there's a day before or after when you would be eligible for this. And while Biden says, well, we will be open to several hundreds of thousands. Well, why aren't those borders open to these people who are escaping either the actual or imminent dangers of military combat in their own regions and cities? No, this is the mindset. It has nothing to do per se with race or ethnicity or language. There's this mindset that it is the duty of the government to centrally plan the demographics of a country. And by this, I mean the number of people who are going to be allowed in, with what profile of features. Do you have an advanced degree? Could you invest in an American business? Are you an illiterate day worker? And it's this idea that the government is going to central plan entry and amounts of people from different countries under different circumstances based upon what they think the American society and the American economy both needs and should have. And that is, as you were suggesting, a central planning mentality. Are there perhaps prejudices about people from Latin America or other parts of the world? Quite possibly. But the behavior towards the Ukrainians demonstrate, because they are Europeans in the ethnic sense, that this has to do with the idea of a mindset of control, regardless of who these people are who are attempting to enter the United States. And until that mindset is changed, that it is not the duty and the responsibility to tell who may enter into the country, where a person may live, how they may earn a living, in association and interaction with whom and on what terms, this will continue. It's just another form of of control and restriction of people's lives. The government is basically saying, we own you, or we declare that you don't fit into our people ownership pattern and you may not enter the country. And as you were saying, this disaster will not go away. For decades, the war on drugs has continued. It has not been abolished, has not been significantly dampened. It will go on for as long as the government tries to drive underground what are the free choices of people, which would be non-violent, non-harming, and only beneficial if the state would just get out of the way. And that applies to immigration as well. And this presumption of, I'll just sort of amplify your point, this idea of loading people onto vans or buses and trucking them up, at least what, a day and a half ride, 2-day ride up to Washington, D.C. from Texas, and then just opening the doors of the buses and saying you're out, and dropping them in front of some government building. And I mean this is treating human beings as if they're merely objects and not people with wills, consciences, hopes, dreams, sufferings that they've gone through, and wishes to just have a better life. It really is highly unethical and deeply immoral.
Yeah, I wrote today in my blog that I can't help but wonder whether Greg Abbott was thinking of those Texas cattle drives in the 19th century, where they drive the cattle and move their cattle to Kansas to take to market. That's what he's essentially doing with these immigrants. He's just moving and dumping them like they were animals. Just incredible that anybody, especially somebody that prides himself on being a Christian, could possibly treat human beings like this. And I'm so glad you brought up the Ukrainian example, because I mean, this whole Ukraine thing is so filled with hypocrisy that it just smells to death. It's just rotten to the core. That what they're saying is, oh, we love you, Ukrainians. We love you for wanting to join NATO, because that's what the war is all about. They keep saying, oh, this is a war about freedom. And no, it's not. It's all about joining NATO, this bureaucratic dinosaur. And we love you. We're going to send you bombs. We're going to send you missiles. We're going to send you all kinds of things that'll keep this war going as long as we can keep it going. And it doesn't matter how much death and destruction. It's all worth it for the right to join NATO. But we don't love you so much that we want you to come over here and live. We don't love you that much. And it brings to mind that Roosevelt, when Hitler was willing to let go of the Jews, and a lot of people don't know this, that Hitler was willing to let go of, release every Jew in Germany who wanted to leave in the 1930s. And he says, here, leave, go. Well, you can't go, you can't leave if there's no country willing to take you. And in the 19th century, when America had its system of open immigration, a system that lasted for more than 100 years, there would have been no problem. They just get on a ship and come on over and no questions asked. But by this time, in the 30s, America had adopted this socialist system of immigration controls. So what was Franklin Roosevelt's response? Oh, no, we have the quota system, and the quota has been filled. We can't accept any more Jews. And therefore, there's the contribution, if you want to use that term, to the Holocaust. Because if we'd had a system of open immigration, or if Roosevelt had not been so callous, millions of Jews would have been able to get out and come to the United States. It reeks with hypocrisy, especially as you point out, these other countries are willing to take these refugees, but not U.S. officials. We'd rather send them bombs and missiles and bullets and more death and destruction. Notice the difference, Richard, between America's founding system of open immigration and no foreign interventionism. The message went out and stayed out for about 100 years that if you're suffering from tyranny overseas, an invasion, a revolution, famine, or whatever, we will not send military forces. We will not send weaponry. We will not send anything like that to help you out. That is not the role of the U.S. government, to serve as a dictatress of the world, or to go in search of monsters to destroy, as John Quincy Adams put it. But if you can get out and you're willing to come, there will always be at least one country, the United States, that you can come to that will not forcibly deport you to your country of origin or to any other country. That once you get here, you're here for as long as you want to stay. That to me was a beautiful moral system. No foreign interventionism and open immigration. Both of those principles were abandoned, and look where we are today.
You know, you mentioned the Declaration of Independence, and that we, of course, all know the famous lines about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what is less given attention to is that this relatively short document, which the Declaration is, most of it is a list of the colonial grievances against the British. In other words, fine, you declare these principles, but why do you want to leave the British Empire? Why do you wish to secede? And they enumerate them, most of them having to do with government restrictions on economic liberty. But one of them, and I'm not going to remember the exact wording, is that they basically are complaining that the British are preventing emigration. That is, they will not allow people to come who want to come to the 13 colonies. In other words, they're restricting people going from England or other European countries and settling in the Americas. So they're complaining that there are barriers to allowing people to come in, not barriers to keep people out.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, speaking of the Declaration, and you know, if we also refer to the Constitution, there's no question that when the Constitutional Convention came out and reported that they had not come up with a proposal to modify the Articles of Confederation, which everybody thought they were going to. The Articles were a type of governmental system that existed for about 10 years. And they said, and instead we got this new proposal for a limited government republic. And here it is, you know. Well, if that proposal had been for a system of immigration controls and a system of foreign interventionism, like what the U.S. has been doing with NATO and Iraq, foreign alliances, a national security state, Pentagon, CIA, NSA, massive military-industrial complex, a welfare state, a drug war, and all the other things that we live under today, there is no possibility, Richard, none, that our American ancestors would have approved the deal. In which case, we would continue to operate under the Articles, which had a federal government so weak, whose powers were so weak, they didn't even have the power to tax. Imagine a federal government with no power to tax. And I want to underline something here in the waning moments of the show that of a point I made early on, that you've got this police state. You know, I mentioned that I'd been to Laredo recently, and ever since as long as I can remember, they've had this immigration checkpoint north of town on IH-35. And I think it was established there when I was in high school. But you come over a hill, you can see pictures of it online. Just Google immigration checkpoint Laredo images, and you'll see what it looks like. I mean, it's a surreal thing. You feel like you're entering the United States, like you're in Mexico, because it's this huge permanent station. Now, when I was in high school, it was just a little temporary station that they would have erected for a few days, and then they'd come back and leave it and come back. Now it's permanent. And you know, with side things where they direct cars, and if you don't answer their questions, you're in trouble. I mean, you've got to be really nice and polite to them. If they say open your trunk, you open your trunk. In other words, you have to defer to authority here inside the United States. So every single American who lives in Laredo, that doesn't even go into Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, has to subject himself to a search because he's going north to San Antonio or Dallas or Austin or wherever. That's the police state, and people have become so accustomed to it. It's just a normal way of life. But the people that are poor, that are in not very fancy cars, that don't speak English, and when I was there, around, I'd say 25% of Laredoans couldn't speak English. They got to carry their passport with them inside the United States. This is the immigration police state that comes with immigration controls.
Yes, I think that once these things get institutionalized and therefore become taken for granted, like that's what you just do and put up with, the sense that it has involved a loss of freedom is greatly weakened, and that plays into the power of the hands of those in political authority.
Absolutely. They become the nice little deferential mice who think they're free. I mean, that's my favorite quote Goethe's quote, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free." So on that note, Richard, we'll wrap things up. Hey, enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to talking to you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of FFF. Subscribe to our FFF Daily if you're new to the show. Remember my book, which continues to get some really nice reviews on Amazon, An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder story. You can buy it at Amazon, $9.95 Kindle, $14.95 paper version. I think you guys would greatly enjoy it. On that note, Richard, good to see you again, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.